Well, thank you, Joe, for that very kind and generous introduction. I'm honored to be here. And yeah, it took a while. Maybe it's the stubborn German in me, but it's been about a decade since I preached, and so it's been a bit of an emotional journey, but it's been good for my soul. And thank you for the kind welcome. Most of you have no idea what you're in for, but I appreciate the kind welcome. I'm not sure if you're like me, but I'm always intrigued with people and their behavior, and often quite fascinated by the ability and capabilities and accomplishments of people. In the last month or so, I've been listening to various TED Talks, and just struck again with the brilliance of people and their ability to conceive and to accomplish. But there are also those moments when the pendulum swings the other way. Do you know what I mean? When the brilliance maybe isn't quite there. July and August are months when many people take vacations. And these are actual conversations as told by travel agents, when maybe the brilliant factor wasn't all there. A client called in inquiring about a package to Hawaii. After going over all the costs, she asked, would it be cheaper to fly to California and then take the train to Hawaii? A man called. He was furious about a Florida package we did. I asked what was wrong with their vacation in Orlando. He said he was expecting an ocean view room. Well, I tried to explain that that's not possible since Orlando is in the middle of the state. He replied, don't lie to me. I looked on the map, and Florida is a very thin state. Another man called and asked if he could rent a car in Dallas. When I pulled up his reservation, I noticed he had only a 45-minute layover in Dallas. And so when I asked why he wanted a car, his matter-of-fact response was, I've heard Dallas has a huge airport, and so I need a car to drive between the gates to save time. As we all know, Banff is a very popular destination for tourism. People come from around the world, and many come from the States as well. And they often go to the tourist information place and ask various kinds of questions. Some of which the staff had heard are, how do the elk know they're supposed to cross at the elk crossing signs? And at what elevation does an elk become a moose? Here's a bright one. Is it okay to keep an open bag of bacon on the picnic table, or should I store it in my tent? Probably one of my favorites is, how do you get your lake so blue? Park staff, well, we take the water out in fall and paint the bottom. The tourists reply, oh. Country of origin has been withheld. Dr. Bruce Larson, who holds advanced degrees in psychology and theology, writes, you cannot be a whole person. You cannot be a well person unless you have hope. As people, we can rebound against wind and weather, tragedy and trauma, even disease and depression, so long as we have hope. We can live weeks without food, days without water, and even several minutes without air, but take away our hope, and within the briefest amount of time, we toss in the towel. On May 13th, he sent this email to his family. You may wonder sometimes why people kill themselves and don't say anything about it. I understand the silence. I have decided to give you all a heads up, not that I expect anyone to care. Because of many situations, I have decided to take my life next week. I don't want to live anymore. Everything and everyone is against me. I can't do it anymore. I've tried hard to be successful and worked very hard, but everyone hates me. I'm not going to give people the satisfaction anymore. That's it. It's the kind of email that shakes you to the core and sucks the air out of the room, especially when it's from your own brother. In his profound book, Becoming Human, Jean Vanier talks about once visiting a psychiatric hospital that was like a warehouse of human misery. Hundreds of children with severe disabilities were lying neglected on the cots. There was a deadly silence. Not one of them was crying. And he writes, when they realize that nobody cares, that no one will answer them, these children no longer cry. It takes too much energy. We cry only when there is hope that someone may hear us, that someone may actually care. Hope. So how does it really live in our lives, in our conversations, and in our thinking? Is it just wishful thinking? Is it sometimes a strong emotion? Or is it just part of casual conversation? Or maybe sometimes it's just a convenient Christian cliche. In our culture of ease and plenty, is it merely an abstract concept? Or is it truly the anchor of the soul? Is hope the crack in our dark places that lets the light shine in? Is it the open window that breathes fresh purpose and meaning into our lives? Is it the light? Or is it the candle that lights the path to a place of peace? This morning I want to see if we can find some anchor points in our ongoing quest for a greater understanding and hopefully a deeper experience of hope. A hope that gives a sense of serenity even in the middle of all that happens under the sun. And to help us in our quest, I want to look at the book of Ecclesiastes, the 21st book of the Bible. When you're tired of chasing the wind, finding a place of serenity. The author begins this way. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. I, the teacher, was king of Israel. I lived in Jerusalem, and I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. We all live our lives under the sun, and each morning we wake up to stunning beauty, fascinating people, and endless possibilities. But it is also a place where promises are broken, right? Dreams shattered, relationships disappoint, where there's daily deception, incalculable injustices, fake news, and the list goes on and on. So much that seems meaningless. In times like these, can we be people with purpose and meaning, people with joy, people of hope? And when we're tired of chasing the wind, where can we go to catch our breath and find something that won't slip away, something to trust in? Strangely enough, the book of Ecclesiastes provides us with some help. For as Hebrew 1:1 says, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Well, one of the ways that God has spoken to us is what is called wisdom literature. And the book of Ecclesiastes is part of the wisdom literature in Scripture. Wisdom literature has its own unique style and substance as it seeks to address the issues of truth and realities. And there's a fresh openness to ask the tough questions and even to make the kinds of confessions that we often feel but are afraid to voice. The style is more of a reflective teacher than a fiery preacher. The substance, well, it's quite unique in Scripture in that it is not specifically about God's redemptive work, but it arrives at the foundation of our relationship with God from a different perspective. And yet, a book that is supposed to provide us with some anchor points for a solid hope, the opening certainly doesn't sound very promising, does it? In fact, the further you read, the more discouraging it gets. And what we find as we read through the book, that there are two dominant themes in the book, and then there's a third theme that seems to lurk in the shadows. The first theme is that of meaningless. In the first half, it's described as chasing the wind. Fascinating phrase, isn't it? Chasing the wind. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly, but I learned firsthand that pursuing all this is like chasing the wind. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anymore or anywhere. Now in the second half, this meaninglessness is described as not knowing. He says in 6:12, for who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? Like, who really knows? And so this dominant theme rings through this book time and time again, meaningless. The second theme we see is that of no profit or no advantage. Throughout the book, the teacher tries to answer the question, what is the good or what is the advantage of all that goes on under the sun? And repeatedly he says it's no advantage. There's no profit. In chapter 2, we read the following. I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I possessed flocks and herds, larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasure of men, many concubines. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind. There was no profit under the sun. When our girls were much younger, we were on vacation on the West Coast, enjoying time on the beach. And like many families with young children, we were building sandcastles while the tide was out. But then, slowly but surely, it began to make its way back in. At first, we tried to protect our beautiful castles with walls, and then we dug trenches, but eventually there was nothing we could do but watch them disappear. In many ways, the teacher is saying, under the sun, we are all like children, building sandcastles while the tide is out. And yet, in the midst of these two dominant, depressing themes, there is a hopeful whisper of a third, the joy of life. In the midst of all this meaninglessness and chasing after the wind, we find these kernels of hope. So I decided there's nothing better than to enjoy food and drink and to find satisfaction in work. Then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God. For who can eat or enjoy anything apart from Him? And so I concluded that there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. But how do we put all this meaninglessness and having no advantage together with joy and hope? There are two keys that unlock what is going on in this book to reveal the basis for hope and trust. And the first is the teacher's method. The teacher's method, which is very careful and very critical, where he says in chapter 1, verse 13 and 14, I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is being done under the heavens. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So what is the teacher's method here? Well, quite simply, it's what philosophers call empiricism. And basically what it means, it's that system of thought which believes that truth, that knowledge or my sense of reality is based purely on my personal experience. The teacher is demonstrating what happens when we attempt to find truth, reality, or meaning in life through purely secular means. When our points of reference do not include God, but only that which is under the sun. You see, if our foundation for truth, for knowing, for living, is based only on subjective experiences, then the honest and logical conclusion will be meaninglessness or a chasing after the wind. Can you see how this ancient sage speaks powerfully to much of our modern despair of our time? And yet at the same time, his method becomes a critical evaluation of secularism, a life without any reference to God. However, his reflections move beyond a critique of empty secularism. And the final key to the book is the compelling concluding statement. And it is this conclusion which builds hope and strengthens serenity in our lives. As Jacques Ellul said many years ago, in order to be prepared to hope in what does not deceive, we must first lose hope in everything that does. And that's really the teacher's message. The teacher wishes to deliver us from a rosy-colored, self-confident, godless life. He wishes to drive us to see that God is there, and that to fear him is the only way to make sense of life. It is the only thing that will provide us with a meaningful and lasting hope, as well as a profound and unshakable sense of serenity. The teacher's compelling and concluding message is found in chapter 12, verse 13. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. As Joe and other teachers have unpacked, fear isn't this kind of teeth-shattering, shaking in our boots, kind of cowering under God. No, when the scriptures talk about the fear of the Lord, it's about a holy reverence. It's to be in awe of him. To truly fear God is to love and worship him. There's a fascinating story in Genesis 20 which illustrates this point most powerfully. It's the story of Abram. Listen as I read. Abram traveled south to Negev, and while he was camping in Gerar, Abram said of his wife, she's actually my sister. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream that night and told him, you're as good as dead. The woman you took, she's a married woman. Now Abimelech had not yet slept with her, hadn't so much as touched her. He said, Master, would you kill an innocent man? Didn't he tell me she's my sister? And didn't she herself say, he's my brother? I had no idea I was doing anything wrong when I did this. Abimelech was up first thing in the morning. He called all his house servants together and told them the whole story. They were shocked. Abimelech went to Abraham and said, whatever were you thinking? What were you thinking when you did this? And notice Abram's response. Abraham said, I just assumed there was no fear of God in this place and that they'd kill me to get my wife. Abraham distrusted the moral atmosphere of Abimelech's court because he thought they had suppressed the innate fear of God. Some years ago, Dr. Bruce Walke of Regent College observed, our Western world is really in a state of moral chaos because it has self-consciously rejected its innate and inherited fear of God. Could it be Could it be that too much of our world is in a state of intellectual and moral chaos because we are seeking to address critical issues without any moral categories or spiritual foundations? And with so much moral and intellectual chaos around us, it is not surprising that we are experiencing an ambush of emotional confusion and relational fragmentation as well. All of which, I want to submit to you, has a profound correlation to a person's ability to live with hope, to live in peace. And so in conclusion, the book lifts us above the meaninglessness of purely secular thinking and living and invites us to fear God, to truly worship and love Him as we live in obedience to His word. But I want to drill a little deeper on this fear of the Lord this morning, because in my mind, to truly fear God and to love Him, it's really about having a settled conviction about three characteristics of God. We won't have time to read all the passages from Ecclesiastes, but I believe to truly fear God and to live above all the meaninglessness under the sun, we need to have a really solid conviction about three characteristics of God. It was A.W. Tozer. This is probably one of my favorite quotes, when he said, "The most important thing about us is what comes into our mind when we think about God." Reflect on that. Because what comes into your mind when you think about God shapes everything about your life. Your parenting, your business, our view of God shapes everything. Brian Tracy, I think it's in his book, captures this truth when he says, change your thinking, change your life. Three characteristics of God that I believe we need to have a real settled conviction about in the context of what we've been saying and reading about in the book of Ecclesiastes is a conviction about God's justice. That He will reward righteousness and punish wickedness, even though there seems to be no apparent justice in the world. Secondly, a conviction about the wisdom of God, that He will order life to make it beautiful in spite of all that is incomprehensible. Yeah, this requires faith. For under the sun, we cannot rationally put it all together, can we? But the final characteristic of God, which I think is the core, is to have a conviction about His goodness. This enables us to enjoy the gift of life. To truly enjoy life is a gift, especially given all the meaninglessness under the sun. This is the artesian well from which life-giving hope flows, that God cares and that God is really good. On July 12th, just a month ago, my brother sent me a personal email. He says, "Yeah, I'm a little more hopeful. I reached a new low where too many negatives had accumulated, and one incident took me over the edge. Everything went black. Worse than anything I experienced before, and I couldn't control my emotions anywhere. A scary place." He then goes on to describe the goodness, the practical goodness he experienced from his family, especially those close by. This kindness, this caring became the crack, became the window in his dark place. It breathed hope into his despair, and it showed him a path forward. When we're tired of chasing the wind, finding a place of serenity, of joy, of hope. For as Proverbs 14:27 says, the fear of the Lord is a life-giving fountain. It offers escape from the snares of death.